The morning fog clings to everything. Your cloak, your boots, your rapidly deteriorating will to live. The ground is soft and uneven underfoot. A mix of churned up mud, old ash, and the kinds of things you don't ask too many questions about. Chickens wander nearby, pecking aimlessly, like they too are trying to figure out how you ended up here. Somewhere behind you, someone is vomiting into a pile of hay with tremendous enthusiasm. You're standing outside a long house at the edge of a coastal village whose name you've never bothered to learn, mostly because you didn't think you'd be staying long. Just passing through a favor here, a gamble there. One bad drinking session, one ill-advised arm wrestling match, and suddenly someone mentions that you owe the boys, which is how you came to be standing here at the crack of dawn, holding a damp cloak and trying to look braver than you feel. You weren't supposed to be here. In fact, just a few days ago, you were on track for a perfectly mediocre life. You had a plan. Not a good one, but a plan. Maybe open a stall. Maybe marry someone with 2 goats and low standards. You knew how to whittle. You knew how to nod convincingly when older men told loud stories. You were, by every reasonable metric, completely unequipped for war. But none of that matters now, because someone who knows someone who heard you owed someone a favor has decided you're going on a Viking raid. The man delivering this news has the kind of face that suggests smiling is against his religion. His hair is braided in thick ropes that look like they could strangle a boar. His arms are the size of small trees. His chest is bare because shirts are for the weak or the recently stabbed. He doesn't ask. He announces, "You raid with us tomorrow." That's it. No explanation, no invitation, just a flat statement of fact, like telling someone the sun rises, or that stew will be watery again. You glance behind you. No one corrects him. A few people even nod. You consider asking for more details, like key, like what kind of raid this is, or what you're expected to do, or if your position comes with dental coverage, but you already know the answer. This is a one-way conversation, and it ends with you on a boat. He holds out an axe. You take it because what else are you going to do? The axe is not new. It chipped in 3 places, smells faintly of fish, and the handle is slick with something. That might be oil or might be fierce sweat from the last guy. You hold it like it might bite you, which to be fair, it might. The blade glints dull in the morning light, as if it too is unimpressed with your resume. Honor, they call it glory. A chance to prove yourself. But the truth is more mundane. Raids require bodies, and you're youngish. You have working limbs, and you're not important enough to be missed if things go poorly. You are, in the most practical sense, extremely available. You weren't asked to join. You are absorbed like soup into bread, like guilt into a social obligation. One minute you're enjoying a drink, the next you're being clapped on the back and called brother by men with scars that look like punctuation marks. There is no training, no orientation, no helpful scroll with 6 things every new Viking should know. There's just a general sense that if you die, it'll be your fault for being bad at it. That night you attempt sleep in a communal hall that smells of sweat, old ale and damp wool. The man next to you snores like a dying woolus. Another sharpens his blade rhythmically like he's lulling it to sleep. Outside, someone sings a low, droning hymn to Odin, or possibly just drunkenly yells at the sky. Hard to say either way. The ambiance is not soothing. You lie there staring at the roof beams, wondering how many people die in their first raid. You don't know. No one talks about it. They only talk about the ones who came back with silver, or scars, or both. And those are the success stories. At dawn, the village begins to stir. You're roused by a man kicking you lightly in the ribs and saying, "Up new meat," with what might be affection or contempt or both. Outside, the boats are ready. Long, narrow, vaguely menacing. They look more like coffins than vessels, and they'll be your home soon. You're handed a satchel, dried fish, sour ale, maybe some. Hard bread, not so much provisions as edible disappointment. A man ties a length of rope to your belt, mutters something about not falling overboard this time, and wanders off without elaborating. You have questions. The rope has no answers. You glance around at the rest of the crew. Some are old, some are young. All look entirely too comfortable with the idea of setting things on fire for money. One of them is already shirtless and chanting. Another is muttering to an axe like it's an old friend. You nod to one, and he nods back with the slow, deliberate menace of a man who eats raw onions for fun. And just like that, you're part of something. A band of warriors, a brotherhood of blades, a floating disaster waiting to happen. You step onto the boat, the wood cacks beneath your feet. The sea stretches out ahead, dark and endless and utterly indifferent to your survival. Congratulations, you've been recruited. You're aboard. That's the good news. The bad news is that you're now seated on what is essentially a glorified canoe made of ambition and hubris. A Viking longship, sleek, narrow, low to the water, and approximately as comfortable as sitting on a ladder for 7 hours during a windstorm. The planks are hard. Of course they are. You suspect they've been designed that way, possibly to toughen you up, or possibly because someone decided that comfort was a dangerous luxury. You're shoulder to shoulder with 30 or so other men, all of whom seem to be radiating heat and bad decisions. There's no room to stretch, no room to breathe. Just you, your new friends, and the cold slap of the sea, waiting just inches below your boots. You're not sitting so much as perching. There's no backrest, no cushion, just a splintered bench polished smooth by years of damp butts and quiet suffering. Your thighs are already starting to go numb. It's going to be a long voyage. Someone shouts oars down. You grab yours like a man handed a live snake. It's massive, thick, and worn. Much like the crew you're supposed to row. That much is clear. No one explains how you mimic the others and try not to look like someone whose primary exercise until now was lifting stew bowls. The first pull nearly dislocates your shoulder. Longships are an engineering marvel. Long, lean, shallow, drafted. Beasts that glide across water with unsettling speed. They're meant to strike terror into the hearts of villagers and monks. They are not meant to be comfortable at all. There's no below deck, no sleeping quarters, no personal space. You're exposed to the sky, the wind, the rain, and each other's increasingly aggressive body odor. Rowing is rhythmic in theory. In practice, it's more like a painful team-building exercise conducted by someone who hates you. Every muscle in your body begins to complain immediately. Your arms scream. Your back threatens to unionize. Your palms develop blisters at a speed that feels medically concerning. There is no break. You row until someone says stop. No one says stop. You learn quickly that no one is in charge of pacing. If you're lucky, the man ahead of you keeps a steady tempo. If you're unlucky, he's the enthusiastic type who rows like he's trying to outrun a prophecy. Either way, you try to keep up and silently pray that he doesn't have a seizure mid-stroke. You'd think the sea would be your enemy, but it's more indifferent than malicious. Cold, endless, quiet, in a way that's almost unnerving. The waves slap against the hull in a slow, lazy rhythm. Seagulls cry overhead, offering harsh commentary. Occasionally, you pass a floating chunk of something that used to be alive. A man beside you leans over the edge and vomits with the resigned professionalism of someone who's done this many times before. Another sharpens his sword with intense eye contact and no sense of personal boundaries. You try not to meet his gaze. You focus on rowing, on surviving, on not getting splashed by the vomit. The wind picks up. It cuts through your cloak and into your bones. Viking cloaks, it turns out, are more decorative than warm. You begin to wonder if you'll ever be dry again. There is a sail, technically a big square sheet of wool dyed with stripes and stitched, with a quiet desperation of someone who knew this boat was going somewhere terrible. When the wind favors you, the sail is hoisted. It flaps, it groans. The ship surges forward with a lurch that makes several men curse and one man fall off his bench. But the wind does not always favor you. So, you row. You row until your arms go numb, until your mind begins to wander. You wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. You wonder if you'll die at sea. You wonder what happens if you simply stop rowing. You consider trying it, but the man beside you has arms like tree trunks and a short temper. Better to keep rowing. The crew dynamic is simple. The loudest man is usually in charge. The strongest man gets the best seat. The man with the least. To live for volunteers for everything. Everyone else tries not to get noticed. You've already failed at that. You're the new guy. You're fascinating. At least 3 people are betting on whether you'll vomit, cry, or both before the week is over. You try to keep your head down. You row. You row because stopping isn't an option. Because you're part of the machine now, a living, sweating cog. In a boat-shaped nightmare. And the shore, nowhere in sight. By now, you've worked up an appetite. That's unfortunate because mealtime aboard a Viking longship is less of a meal and more of a test of how much sadness you can chew through in one sitting. Someone passes you a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside is your meal. Dried fish. Again, you do not ask what kind. It has the texture of old rope and the flavor of salt, regret, and something faintly reminiscent of low tide. You chew and chew. It does not soften. It simply disintegrates into smaller, equally unpleasant pieces. It is somehow both sharp and damp. You swallow anyway. Beside you, someone drinks from a jug and belches theatrically. He offers it to you. It smells like vinegar and betrayal. This is the ale, or what they call ale. It was likely brewed in a barrel that once held goat urine. You sip, your tongue immediately regrets it. You nod in false appreciation. This is the routine: dried fish, sour ale. Occasionally, someone offers hard bread that could be used as a blunt weapon. One man pulls out a pickled onion and becomes a celebrity for 10 full minutes. You think you see someone cry quietly. Food is stored in barrels and sacks, loosely wrapped in cloth or stuffed in corners of the ship where rats might find them first. Spoilage is expected. Mold is a seasoning. Hunger is constant. No one eats enough. No one complains out loud. Complaining invites attention, and attention is dangerous. Water is worse. It goes stale, quickly, or sour, or both. If you're lucky, you get the good barrel. If you're unlucky, you get the one someone used as a latrine by mistake last season. You drink sparingly, or you drink the ale and hope your liver is feeling brave. Hygiene, that's adorable. No one bathed before this trip. No one will bathe during it. Possibly not after either. Soap is rare. Water is reserved for drinking. And even then, it's suspect. You smell like sweat, salt, fish oil, and whatever crawled into your boots and died 3 days ago. Everyone else smells the same. You become nose-blind after a while, or your body just gives up. There is no toilet. There is only the edge of the boat and your best guess at timing. You wait until you think no one is looking. You shuffle carefully, trying not to fall overboard or lose your balance mid-process. You brace against a rope and pray to every god. You can remember, if you're lucky, it's over quickly. If you're not, you become the day's entertainment. One man did it while the boat pitched left. He went right. No one speaks of him. Disease travels faster than wind. A cough here, a rash there. Someone's nose starts bleeding and doesn't stop. You learn not to ask questions. If a man gets too sick, he gets thrown overboard. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. There's nowhere to isolate. No herbs, no healer. You can't be dead weight on a boat that needs all hands rowing. Morale exists in a strange, bleak way. Someone tells a story. It's about a man who once drank a barrel of ale and wrestled a bear. The details change each time. Laughter sounds like barking. Jokes are short, crude, and involve goats more often than you'd expect. But in their own strange way, they keep the boat moving. You stop thinking of food as pleasure. It becomes maintenance, a task. Chew, swallow, survive. You dream of warm bread and soup. You wake to more fish. You are unquestionably living the Viking dream. And it smells like fermented despair. Land. It appears on the horizon like a hallucination. At first, it's just a smudge against the sky, a vague promise of stability. But slowly, painfully, it resolves into hills, trees, a few scattered buildings, and something much worse. Certainty, you've arrived. The O's stop. Blessed silence. The boat glides forward, creaking like it too is trying to brace for what's next. You sit hunched over your O, every part of you aching. Your hands are blistered. Your arms feel like they've been replaced with wet rope. Your spine has staged a small rebellion. And your stomach, well, your stomach is weighing its options. The others, however, seem energized by the sight of land. They stretch, they grunt. One man ties a red ribbon into his beard. Another wipes something unpleasant off his blade and starts humming what can only be described as a murder lullaby. There's a sudden clarity in the air. Not quite excitement. Not quite dread. More like momentum. You do not share it. The village ahead is small. That's good or bad. You're not sure which. There's a church, a few houses. Smoke curls lazily from a chimney. Somewhere you can just make out the sound of someone chopping wood. They have no idea. None of them do. And somehow that makes it worse. You're told this will be a quick one, in and out. The word easy is thrown around, which seems like a bold thing to say about something involving swords and fire. The crew begins to move with practiced economy, checking weapons, whispering to each other, adjusting their gear. You try to mirror them, but your hands are shaking, and your stomach has officially declared war. You've never done this before. You're not even sure what this really is. You know the theory, loot, burn, leave. But the reality feels heavier, wetter. You can smell the shore before you reach it. earthy, green, faintly sweet, innocent. It doesn't match the things in your head. You grip your axe tighter. It does not help. There are rituals you learn, some spoken, some silent. A few of the men sit in a circle and chant low prayers to Odin, their hands painted with runes you don't recognize. One cuts a drop of blood from his palm and smears it across the bow. Another carves something into a piece of driftwood and tosses it into the sea. You don't ask questions. It feels disrespectful to interfere with other people's coping mechanisms, especially when they involve knives. Someone offers you a charm, a small bone strung on a bit of cord. You don't know what it is, but you tie it around your neck anyway. It feels like something you're supposed to do, like locking the door before bed, or spitting after seeing a black cat. Belief here isn't about comfort. It's about survival. The gods are not kind. They are not warm. They are not listening unless blood is involved. You find yourself muttering something under your breath. You don't know what it means. You just hope it counts. You're ordered to scout. Well, not you. You're not trusted with anything that important. But two of the older men, the quiet ones with serious faces and knives the length of your forearm, slip into the trees and vanish. No words, no farewell, just two shadows heading toward a village full of the blissfully unaware. The rest of you. Wait, this is somehow worse than rowing. You sit on a rock. You pick at your calluses. You try to control your breathing. You fail. The others are quieter now, focused. Some are sharpening weapons. Some are staring at nothing, mentally preparing for the blood to come. You try not to stare at the one who, according to rumor, once killed a bear with a soup spoon. He's currently braiding his hair and smiling to himself. You do not ask why. You check your axe again. Still dull, still sticky. You consider asking someone for sharpening advice, but the idea of admitting how little you know seems more dangerous than the dull blade itself. Eventually, the scouts return. They crouch by the fire and speak in hushed tones to the leader. Not the loudest man, but the comst. He nods, grunts, points. You watch them draw crude shapes in the dirt. A house here, a field there, a path between them. It looks like a child's attempt at a map, but everyone nods as if it's divine truth. You pretend to understand. You don't, but you do understand this. The time is near. There is a final silence. No one speaks, not even the man who hasn't stopped humming since breakfast. The sail is furled. The weapons are secured. You see one man close his eyes and press his forehead to the haft of his axe like he's praying or maybe apologizing. You feel like you should say something to someone, to anyone, but your throat is closed up and your heart is hammering loud enough that you're pretty sure the birds can hear it. This is the moment they never show in the stories. Not the glory, not the fire, the waiting, the knowing, the quiet breath before the scream. You crouch in the boat as it edges into the shallows. Your boots sink into wet sand. The trees are thick. The sky is grey. Somewhere a dog barks in the distance. You freeze. No one moves. Then someone whispers soon, and you realize with cold clarity that you're very likely going to die. There's no official countdown. No whispered now. No dramatic pointing. No battle cry that echoes through the ages. It just happens. One moment the woods are still mist, curling around your ankles, birds rustling in the trees, the scent of wet earth rising with each step, and then suddenly sound tears through the world like it's been waiting to pounce. A war horn low, droning somehow both hollow and full, like the sound of a mountain deciding to fall. It comes from somewhere ahead, but it echoes in your chest. Your bones vibrate. Your fingers tighten instinctively around your axe. And then yelling, so much yelling. It's not the heroic kind, not the practiced rallying roar you've seen men perform in the village after too much me. No, this is primal animal. The sound of men who've unhooked the last remaining piece of themselves that cares what happens next. You don't remember standing. You don't remember moving. You're just there now, upright, stumbling forward, breath shallow and ears ringing. Someone rushes past you, screaming something an Old Norse. That might be a curse or a prayer or a grocery list. You don't ask. The tree's thin, and just like that, you're in the village. It feels wrong. You expected a fortress, a battleground, but it's just homes. Modest little buildings, smoke drifting from the chimneys, livestock wandering freely, someone's laundry, still hanging from a line. It looks like some place your grandmother might live, or did live before she died, in a completely non-axe related way. You freeze for a moment. You want to shout a warning. You want to knock on a door and tell someone, anyone, to run. But then the man beside you hurls a torch into the thatched roof of a house, and the fire answers before you can. The roof goes up like it's been waiting. Flames leap. People scream. A woman bolts from the doorway with a child in her arms, and a raider barrels into her like a wolf let off its leash. You flinch. You stare. You tell yourself to move, to help, to do something, and then someone pushes you hard. Go. A voice snarls behind you, and suddenly you're going, running, stumbling, crashing toward the smoke, the fire, the noise. There is no plan. That much becomes clear very quickly. Whatever strategy existed has now dissolved into pure chaos. Raiders are everywhere, kicking in doors, dragging people from hiding spots, overturning carts, laughing, screaming, weeping. You see one man lose his axe in someone's chest, and just keep going, grabbing a pitchfork like it's the most natural thing in the world. You look down at your own weapon, unsure if you're holding it correctly. You haven't used it yet. You're not sure you can. You're not sure you want to. Then someone grabs you. A villager. Older, frantic, swinging a stick like it might help. You don't think, you don't plan, you just react. You swing. The axe connects. There's a sound, a heavy, wet, wrong sound. And the man crumples like dropped laundry. You freeze, you stare. You wait for something inside you to rise. Horror, guilt, satisfaction. But nothing does. Just a dull, echoing emptiness dot around you. The village burns. Flames reach the sky now, casting everything in hell-colored light. Smoke chokes the air, thick and cloying. You stumble past a collapsing roof, past a man trying to drag a sack of silver through a window, past a pig that looks more confused than anyone else here. You find yourself in front of a small chapel. Stone walls, wooden door, a sanctuary. Someone kicks the door in. A priest inside starts to shout something in Latin. It ends in a gurgle. A man drags a golden cross off the wall and tucks it into his belt like he's pocketing a loaf of bread. Someone else urinates in the corner. This is what shock warfare looks like. It's not clean. It's not glorious. It's a mess of shouting and burning and panic. A stampede with axes. The idea is simple. Overwhelm, terrify, dominate, leave nothing untouched. Make it clear that resistance isn't just futile, it's suicidal. You understand that now. You also understand you may never sleep properly again. At some point, you lose track of your group. You're just a man, alone in a burning village, holding an axe. You no longer remember picking up. There's blood on your tunic. You don't know who's... The air is hot and thick and alive. You hear a child crying and don't know what to do with the sound. You duck behind a shed and vomit. Then you stand up and keep going. That's the rhythm of a raid, apparently. Move, burn, break, repeat. You see a man trying to pull something from a corpse's neck and failing. You see another sitting calmly in the dirt, whispering to himself, staring at nothing. You step over a body and try not to think about it. Eventually, the noise begins to fade. Not because it's over, but because your brain starts tuning it out. The fire crackles. People scream. You've heard it all for what feels like hours now, and your mind is doing its best to protect you by turning it into background static. The worst part is how efficient it all is. 15, maybe 20 men, and an entire village is coming apart at the seams. You understand suddenly why this works, why the Vikings were so feared. It's not just the weapons or the fury. It's the speed, the unpredictability, the sheer violence of it. You realize now that you wouldn't last 5 minutes wasn't a warning. It was a generous overestimation. And then it hits you. You're still holding the axe. Your arms are numb. Your legs ache. Your ears ring. You're standing in front of what used to be someone's home. And you're not entirely sure how much blood is. Too much blood. You've killed someone, maybe 2. You didn't think it would feel like this. You didn't think you'd feel nothing. Just smoke in your lungs, soot on your skin, and the knowledge that there's no going back now. Not ever. The signal was given, and you answered. You always imagined battle would feel different. Epic, maybe noble. 2 sides clashing under a dramatic sky. Steel against steel. Warriors locked in honorable combat, while gods watch from above and judge the choreography. Instead, it's a man in a nightshirt getting a sword through the back, while holding a loaf of bread. That's the first thing you see when you round the corner of a burning hut. The man doesn't even scream. He just folds like his spine gave up before his brain realized what was happening. The raider who killed him barely glances down, just pulls his blade free, flicks blood onto the dirt, and keeps moving. It occurs to you belatedly that this isn't a fight. It's a cleanup operation. The villagers weren't prepared. Of course, they weren't. It's dawn or close to it. Most were asleep. Those who weren't were feeding chickens or starting fires for breakfast, not sharpening weapons or reinforcing doors. Some don't even bother resisting. They run or freeze or hold their children and hope. Others grab whatever they can. Kitchen knives, fire pokers, the occasional pitchfork, and try to stand their ground. You see how that ends? A teenage boy charges at a raider with a broken hoe. He gets tackled into a wall and stabbed 3 times before he hits the ground. A woman tries to shield a younger child with her body. It doesn't help. A man with a hammer knocks one of your crew off his feet, and for a moment it looks like he might do some damage. Then 3 others descend on him at once. It's not heroic, it's horrifying, and it's fast. So fast you thought the stories were exaggerated. The ones about how quickly it all went down. How Viking raids came like lightning. How entire villages were gutted in minutes. But they weren't lying. This is what it looks like when violence doesn't wait its turn. No declarations, no rules, just shock, panic, and blood. There's no choreography, no elegant swordplay, just swinging and screaming, and the sickening crunch of things that used to be whole. You see a man fall face first into a trough and not get back up. You see another lose his footing in a chicken coop and get trampled by someone else trying to run. You see a raider get knocked over by a goat. You're not sure if it's the most tragic thing you've seen all day, or the only thing keeping you from collapsing. Your axe is still in your hand. It's heavier now, or your arm is weaker. Maybe both. There's blood on the blade, but you can't remember how it got there. You don't want to remember. You've stopped trying to keep track of who's a threat and who's just there. Everything's moving. Too fast. Bodies rushing past. Fire roaring behind you, and the terrible certainty that if you stop to think, you'll never move again. The adrenaline helps. At first, it floods your system, numbs your hands, sharpens your vision. For a few minutes, you feel invincible like a god of death moving through mortal lives, and then it turns on you. Your heartbeat spikes, your breathing stutters. You start shaking, not from fear, but from overload. Your limbs feel like they're made of someone else's flesh. Your thoughts blur at the edges. You see something horrible, and you can't even react to it properly. It's too much. All of it. You duck into a house inside. It's quiet for a moment. A fire crackles in the hearth. There's a half-eaten meal on the table. Someone was here recently. The bed is unmade. A doll lies on the floor, face down. You take a step forward and trip over a body. You fall hard. Your hands slam into the dirt floor. You scramble upright, and that's when you see her. A woman, middle-aged, eyes open, but unseeing. Her throat is a ruin. One hand still clutches the handle of a knife she clearly never got to use. You gag. You turn and run outside. Outside, the chaos continues. The sky is full daylight now, but it might as well be midnight for all the smoke. Embers dance in the air. Someone screaming, high, thin, constant. You're not sure if they're still alive or just echoing through your head. A man with a club barrels toward you. You react without thinking. You duck. He trips. You bring your axe down, not because you want to, but because that's what your body does now. When it's threatened, it connects. You don't look back. Another man sees you. A villager, older, bloodied, but standing. He pauses. So do you. You stare at each other across the smoldering ruins of someone's garden, and then he turns and runs. You let him, you don't know why. There's nothing glorious about any of this. That's the part the sagas always skip. The smell, the screams, the people who die with their backs turned and their hands raised in surrender. The songs say glory, honor, fame, but standing here ankle-deep in ash and gore, you realize glory is just a word people use to make slaughter feel like something else. This is no battlefield. This is a butcher shop with a marketing problem, and you're one of the butchers. Eventually, someone calls out. A horn blows short, sharp, a signal. It means regroup. The others start to gather, laughing, dragging sacks and spoils. One man's arm is broken, another limps, someone else is missing entirely. No one seems particularly bothered. The dead are part of the equation, just like firewood and rope. You shuffle back to the boat like a sleepwalker, your mind trying to file everything under later. Later, you'll feel it. Later, you'll understand. Later, maybe you'll vomit. Until your ribs crack. But not now. Now you walk. Now you carry the axe. Now you nod when someone says, "Good job." You almost die 3 times. Not from some heroic clash with a sword-wielding champion. Not from a last stand brawl in a burning chapel. No, you almost die from the most historically accurate threat in Viking raiding, your own team. The first time it's your fault, kind of. You're swinging your axe, not at anyone in particular, just into the general vicinity of danger. When your foot slips on, what? You're not entirely sure. Possibly blood, possibly bile, possibly the fermented combination of every bodily fluid known to man. Either way, down you go. The axe keeps going. It misses your shin by what can only be described as divine indifference. You land hard, your arm is pinned under you. For a moment, you genuinely consider whether it would be easier to just stay there and let fate handle the rest. But then someone almost steps on your head, so you roll away and scramble back up, trying to look like that was part of a larger plan. It was not. The second time is more poetic. You're rounding the corner of a burning house, your heart pounding. In your ears and your vision fogged by smoke and panic when a raider barrels straight into you. Big man, big axe. His eyes are wild. The kind of wild that suggests he no longer recognizes concepts like friend or target. You try to shout. What comes out is somewhere between a squeak and a strangled cough. He roars and swings. You duck, not because of instinct or training. You're not that lucky. You duck because you trip on the edge of a scorched cabbage patch. The axe whooshes over your head and embeds itself in a wooden beam behind you with a sound that you're pretty sure you'll hear in your nightmares until the end of time. He pauses. You lock eyes. He blinks, grunts, and moves on like nothing happened. You lie in the cabbage for a full 10 seconds, considering your life choices. The third time is pure comedy. You're chasing or being chased. It's unclear. They're shouting in every direction. A man with a flaming torch sprints past you, shrieking. Something about silver. Another swings a club at what turns out to be a clothesline. The whole village is one big chaotic stew of noise, fire, and very poor visibility. You dart behind a half-collapsed fence, trying to get your bearings. That's when you see him. One of your own. At least you think he's one of your own. He's big, bearded, wearing the same vaguely animal skin ensemble everyone else is. But his eyes land on you like you just insulted his mother and stole his goat. He squints, snarls, raises his spear. "Monk," he shouts. Before you can protest, he's charging. You don't know what part of you screamed louder, your voice or your soul. You barely manage to duck as the spear sails past your ear and embeds itself in a tree behind you. You wave your arms. "I'm not a monk," you yell, which is a sentence you never thought you'd have to say in self-defense. He blinks. "Oh," he mutters. Then he shrugs, turns around, and runs off in a different direction. You sit down just for a second, just to process what your life has become. The truth is, this isn't a coordinated military effort. It's a mess. An effective, terrifying, wildly unregulated mess. Communication is minimal. Strategy is basically go that way and kill everything. No one's wearing uniforms. No one's wearing anything matching, really. Everyone's filthy, half-burned, and moving at high speeds with sharp objects and questionable judgment. You're not in a battle. You're in a brawl that got out of hand. You start to notice the little things, like how many people are bleeding from their own weapons. How many look disoriented or stunned. How often someone stops to wipe blood from their eyes and nearly gets trampled by a horse that's decided it's had enough of this nonsense and is making a break for it. You pass a man sitting against a barrel, clutching his knee and muttering, "That was my sword," over and over again. You pass another covered in flour, possibly from a smashed food store, possibly from a very bad day. You nod, he nods back. Mutual confusion. Brotherhood through chaos. At one point, you consider just lying down. Not dramatically, not in surrender. Just flat in the dirt, very still, and hoping everyone will assume you're dead and move on without you. It's not cowardice, it's survival. In this kind of free-for-all, doing nothing might actually be your safest option. You lie there for a minute. The ground is warm, possibly from fire, possibly from something less comforting. You close your eyes, and then someone stumbles over your legs and falls flat on their face, knocking a bucket of something wet and suspicious directly onto your chest. So much for that plan. Later, you regroup. Most of the men look like survivors of a tavern brawl that expanded into several zip codes. Cuts, bruises, mud, burns. One guy has a black eye and a satisfied expression, which is extra confusing because you don't remember any villagers hitting him. Another limps over with a bloodied tunic and says, "Stepped on a rake." You believe him without question. There's no shame here, only injury. The only thing more dangerous than the villagers is each other. As the fires burn lower and the screams begin to fade, you realize something. You weren't in control. No one was. This wasn't a raid led by skilled tacticians. This was a panic attack wearing a helmet. A blur of instincts and smoke and blood where survival had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with not being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You were 3 times and you lived, which in Viking terms makes you an experienced warrior or extremely lucky. Same thing really. The fighting, if you can call it that, is over. No horns blow to mark it. No one declares victory. Things just quiet down. The screams taper off. The running stops. The air gets heavier with smoke, and the oddly domestic sense of burning grain. A few chickens wander out from hiding and immediately regret it. You stand there, unsure of what to do, until someone claps you on the shoulder hard enough to rattle your spine. Time for spoils, they say, grinning through blood-stained teeth. Right, the fun part. Apparently, looting is supposed to be the reward, the payoff, the glittering pile of stuff you get for surviving the chaos. At least, that's what everyone keeps saying. You're not so sure. You follow the others into the village proper, stepping over collapsed fences, shattered pottery, the occasional corpse. No one looks twice at the bodies anymore. They're just part of the scenery now, like trees or rocks or very quiet, very still warnings. You enter a house, or what's left of it. The roof's collapsed in one corner. The door is hanging off its hinges. Inside, the air is thick with soot and the faint smell of burnt milk. Someone was cooking before this started. You try not to imagine them turning around mid-stir to see death walk through their front door. You rifle through the rubble like a very depressed raccoon. Your first find is a cup, silver, probably tarnished but solid. You wipe it off on your cloak, a pointless gesture given the state of everything, and tuck it into your belt. One of the older raiders nods at you. Approval or amusement, you can't tell. Next is a necklace, delicate fine chain, probably made for someone who didn't swing axes for a living. It's on the floor near a bed. You wonder if the person who wore it ran. You hope they ran. You try not to think about it. Then there's the finger. It's still wearing the ring. You stare at it longer than you should. Not because it's gruesome, though it is, but because some part of you wants to believe this is normal, that this is a thing people do. Pick through the wreckage of a life. Take what shines and pretend the rest isn't sticky and horrible. You pocket the ring. You leave the finger. Outside, the others are laughing. One man found a chest of clothes and is trying on a fur cape that smells like goat. Another is dragging a sack of grain and singing a song with far too many verses about someone named Helga. A third just keeps tossing things into a cart. Spoons, shoes, a small statue of Christ, like he's shopping in a very ethically questionable market. You keep looting because that's what you're supposed to do. You find a small pouch of coins under a floorboard. You find a child's carved toy and quickly put it back, hands trembling. You tell yourself you're collecting wealth, but it feels more like collecting evidence. Silver is what everyone wants. It's a universal language, not just for trade, but for reputation. Silver buys you food, weapons, respect. It gets you into the good feasts and the better stories. A single silver bracelet can mean the difference between being the new guy and being that guy who split a priest and bought the first round. You don't have much, just the cup, the ring, the necklace, and a few coins. It fits in a small sack. It rattles faintly. It doesn't feel like glory. It feels like panic wrapped in linen. You wonder how much it would be worth back home. Then you wonder how many people died for it. Then you stop wondering because it's easier that way. Some of the others are taking things you wouldn't expect. Blankets, dried herbs, wooden bowls. Someone proudly holds up a chicken like it's the Ark of the Covenant. You don't ask, it makes sense though. Not everything is about shine. Salt is valuable, so is wheat, so is anything that might be traded, bartered, or simply eaten without causing food poisoning. Viking economics is surprisingly practical. It's also deeply uncomfortable. You watch a man pry a gold tooth from a corpse. You pretend not to notice. He offers it to you with a grin. You shake your head. He shrugs and pockets it. There's a silence beneath the noise. A kind of quiet that slips in between laughs and clinking metal. It lives in the glances, the averted eyes, the men who pick things up with trembling fingers and then hold them like they might shatter. No one talks about it, not really. The feeling, the part of you that knows this isn't what victory is supposed to look like. That's standing in the ruins of someone else's home. Stuffing your belt with spoons and heirlooms doesn't make you strong. It just makes you heavier. Heavier with things, heavier with thoughts, heavier, and somehow emptier. You return to the boat after a while. Your sack is full. Not bursting, not impressive, but enough. Enough to prove you are here. Enough to buy you a few drinks. Enough to nod back when someone says, "Good haul." You sit on the plank, staring out at the water, trying to ignore the way your hands won't stop shaking. Someone plops down beside you, chewing on something charred. Not bad. For your first raid, they say, nudging your sack with their elbow. Next time you'll get the good stuff. You nod. Smile maybe, and try not to think about what next time means. You don't talk about the people. Not the ones who were caught hiding under beds. Not the ones dragged from their homes. Not the ones who didn't resist or didn't scream. Didn't even blink. Just sat still and let the ropes come. You don't talk about them because no one does. That's the rule, unspoken but understood. Loot is discussed. Kills are bragged about. Wounds are shown off. But the people, the ones who are now tied at the wrists, walking in a silent shuffling line toward the longships, they aren't mentioned. They aren't referred to as people at all. They're goods, stock, extra weight. You pretend not to hear that you see them, of course you do. It's impossible not to. A dozen of them, maybe more. Men, women, a few children, the ones who survived, The ones who are young enough, healthy enough, or pretty enough to be considered worth taking. The rest left behind, or worse, they're bound with rope, not tightly, not cry, just enough, enough, to keep them moving, keep them quiet, keep them manageable. The ropes don't look like restraints. They look like decisions, like finality. Some cry, most don't. Crying, it turns out, takes energy, and they don't have much left. You tell yourself this is part of it, part of the life, the tradition, the Viking way. Raiding isn't just about treasure and glory, it's about wealth, and wealth means people, because people can be sold, traded, worked, kept. You've heard the words before, thr. It sounds old, ceremonial, almost noble in a dark, distant way. You grew up hearing about thurs like they were something between servants and furniture, not quite people, not quite not. Now you're looking one in the eye, and he looks back at you like he wants to burn your ship with his gaze alone. You look away first. You don't ask where they'll end up. You know, in that vague way, people know about things they don't want to think too hard about. Some will be sold in fair-off markets. Some will be bartered to chieftains. Some will live and work in homes like yours. Maybe yours. No one explains it. No one justifies it. It's just what's done. A few of the crew talk about it casually. They joke about who fetched the best price last time. They argue about teeth, muscles, age, like they're discussing livestock. There's a game some of them play, where they guess what each captive is good for. You don't play, you stay quiet. You tell yourself you're better than this. Even as you help lift a sobbing girl into the boat like a sack of grain, you try not to look at them during the loading. They're lined up now, roped together, heads down. One of the men keeps counting them under his breath, as if the number might change when he blinks. Another adjusts the ropes to make sure no one can bolt. Not that anyone's going to. Where would they run? Somewhere behind you, someone laughs. You flinch. You hear one of the captives whispering something. Soft, rhythmic. A prayer maybe, or a lullaby, or just a string of words to keep themselves present. You don't know the language. You don't need to. They're put in the center of the long ship between the benches like cargo, which technically they now are. You sit down across from one, a woman, maybe 30, face stir with ash, hands bound neatly in front of her. She doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She just watches you with the kind of expression that feels heavier than any weapon you've ever held. You try to focus on your oar. It doesn't help. There are no chains, just rope and exhaustion and the certainty that resistance won't change anything. That's how this works. Not with overwhelming force, but with inevitability. You've seen what happens to those who resist. Everyone here has. That's why there's silence. Not the calm kind, the thick, cloying kind. The kind that seeps into your clothes and sits behind your ribs. No one talks. No one jokes. The crew rows. The captives stare. The silence stretches. You try to imagine what they're thinking. Then you stop, because imagining it feels worse than pretending they're not there at all. Back home, they'll be explained away. A gift, a tool, a symbol of status. You'll see one serving meat at a feast, and no one will bat an eye. Maybe someone will nudge you and say, "She's yours now." And you'll have to nod, like, "That's fine," like that makes sense. You wonder how long it takes to stop seeing them as people. You wonder if you've already started. You look at your silver. Then you look at the woman across from you and you feel very, very cold. Someone offers you food. You decline, not out of sympathy, out of nausea. You row. The sea is calm. The boat is heavy. The sun is starting to set, casting golden light on the very quiet, very full vessel. You catch the eye of one of the captives again. He doesn't blink. You wonder if he's memorizing your face. You wonder if he'll dream of you. You hope not. The village is gone. Not in the poetic sense, not metaphorically. It's literally gone, collapsing in on itself, one blackened beam at a time. The air hums with heat. Smoke drifts low, thick and clinging, curling through the ruins like it's reluctant to leave. The scent is a foul cocktail of burned wood, scorched meat, and the unmistakable temps of blood soaked into soil, and something else, wet wool. That heavy, sour smell of soaked cloaks and sweat-slick tunics that no fire can quite get rid of. You're wearing that smell now. It's in your hair, your mouth, your skin. You'll carry it home with you. You'll carry all of this home with you. Someone hands you a torch. You blink at it like it's a mistake. Time to finish it, they say, right? Because murder wasn't the end. This part comes after. The torch is already lit. A slow, steady flame flickering with quiet purpose. It makes a faint sound. A little crackle, a hiss, the occasional spit of sap or oil. It doesn't feel like a weapon. It feels like a tool, something practical. You stare at it, unsure of what you're supposed to do with it now that it's in your hand. Don't leave anything standing, someone adds. That's how they track us. Them, the locals, the soldiers, the ones who'll come looking. If you leave buildings, they might guess who did it. If you leave survivors, they might tell. If you leave a trail, you might be followed. So, you leave ash. You leave silence. You leave nothing. You walk into the smoking wreckage of what used to be a village. The buildings that didn't burn in the chaos are still standing, but only barely. A few walls here, a few roof beams there, a barn that looks almost intact if you squint and ignore the hole in the side. That's where you start. The hay catches. Quickly. Flames race upward like they're late for something. You stand back and watch it go, torch still in hand, feeling more like a spectator than a participant. Then someone points to the chapel. Of course, it's small, just a stone shell with a wooden roof and a carved wooden cross above the door. Probably built by locals or monks, or the kind of people who believed in things like forgiveness and eternal reward. You wonder what it smelled. Like yesterday. Candle wax, maybe old books, hope. Now it smells like carbonized faith. You hesitate, not because it's sacred, not because you believe, but because it feels like a line. Like the kind of act you don't walk back from, even if you weren't walking toward anything in the first place. Go on, someone says. So, you go on. You step inside. It's quiet. The chaos hasn't made it in here yet. The roof is still intact. The walls still stand. There's an altar at the front. Simple wood, plain cloth, a book that's already curling at the edges from the smoke outside. Someone's dropped a censer, long cold. The air is thick with soot and something strangely sweet, incense maybe, or rot. You walk to the altar, torch in hand, and pause. This is where they prayed, where they asked for protection, for mercy, for a tomorrow that didn't come. You set the cloth on fire. The flame spreads fast, licking up the wall hangings, finding the dry places, the hidden places. The wooden roof groans. Smoke fills the chapel. The carved cross above the altar blackens and crumbles. You don't stay to watch it fall. Outside, the others are already moving on. One man kicks over a stone marker, grinning. Another uses his torch like a paintbrush, slashing fire across a half-collapsed fence. Someone singing a low, droning hum, not joyful, not sad, something older than either. A death song, maybe, or just a rhythm to burn by. No one speaks of vengeance. No one speaks of gods. No one says why, because they don't need to. Burning is what comes after taking. Burning is the punctuation at the end of the sentence. Burning is the message. You move through the village like a ghost. Torch in hand, eyes half focused, mind nowhere in particular. A house goes up, a storehouse, a stable. The fire spreads behind you like a rumor, eager and indiscriminate. You feel like you're erasing something. Not just buildings, but stories, names, children's drawings on walls, recipes handed down, favorite places to sit and watch the light change through the trees. All of it gone, that's the point. You understand that now, this isn't cleanup, it's prevention. A burned village tells no tales. Eventually, you're told to stop. Not because there's anything left to burn, but because the boats are full and the wind is good. There's a sense of urgency now. The fires are drawing smoke into the sky, and smoke draws eyes. There are always watchers, always riders, and you don't want to be here when they arrive. You walk back to the shore with ash on your hands and soot. In your lungs, you smell like judgment. You look back once, just once. The village is a smear now. Black and red and flickering orange. Someone might rebuild here one day, plant something, build a new chapel, but not for a while. Not until the wind stops smelling like burnt iron. Back at the boat, no one asks what you burned. No one compares torch counts. There's no ceremony, no acknowledgement. Just the quiet ritual of wiping sweat from your face and pretending your torch didn't just melt someone's sanctuary. Someone pats your shoulder. You're getting the hang of it, they say. You don't respond. You just sit down on your bench, rest the torch across your knees, and wonder how long it takes for the smell of fire to fade from skin. 2 men didn't make it. One of them was impaled, cleaned through like a kebab no one ordered. You didn't see it happen, but you saw what was left. The angle of the spear, the open mouth, the arms stretched out like they had one last thing to say. He was a loud one, the kind who laughed too hard and drank too fast. You can't remember his name. The other, well, no one's really sure. He was there, and then he wasn't. Someone thinks he got caught under a falling roof. Someone else says he took a knife to the neck. Maybe he just walked into the smoke and didn't walk back out. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that his seat on the boat is empty. And empty seats don't row. There's no funeral, no words, no rites, no farewell. Just to fewer voices, to fewer shadows, to wet, silent heaps left face down in the mud, like discarded tools. You glance back once. The bodies are already losing their shape, covered in ash, half sunk in muck. If someone else finds them, they might not even know who they were. Raiders, villagers, it'll all look the same soon. Just another part of the landscape. Another layer of someone else's nightmare. Someone says, shame. Someone else says nothing. At all. You climb into the boat. It's heavier this time. Not just with loot. Not just with the captives, though there are more than before. The weight is everywhere. In your shoulders, in your legs, in the planks of the ship, in the expressions of the men who made it back. No one's talking much. You sit in your place. The bench is slick with sea spray, sweat, and something stickier. You don't investigate. You don't even feel the wood anymore. Your muscles have gone past pain into something deeper, duller, more permanent. You could probably die sitting here and not realize it until the tide rolled you out to sea. Then you get the news. You're pulling double duty, it said casually. Take there or not a request, not a discussion, just a fact passed down like a cup of ale or a knife in the dark. You don't argue what would be the point. The dead don't row and the boat still needs to move. So you move. You shift over, grab the second oar, and start to row. Both arms now, twice the weight, twice the rhythm, half the energy. You dig into the water and try not to scream. The wood cracks, so do your bones. There's a kind of quiet now, not restful, not peaceful, but empty, hollow, like the inside of a shell after something crawled out and left behind only the echo. No one talks about the dead, not the man who got the spear, not the one who vanished, not the others who almost joined them. One man has a bandage wrapped around his hand that's already soaking through. Another is hunched over, coughing into a rag that's probably redder than it started. Still, they row because that's the deal. You raid, you row, you survive, or you don't. Either way, the boat moves. The sky is overcast now, grey and heavy, like it knows what happened and would prefer not to comment. The water is calm, which is worse, somehow. No waves to fight, no wind to blame, just a slow, steady rhythm of ohs and grief and effort. The man next to you grunts. That's it. That's the only sound he's made in an hour. You're not even sure he's fully awake. You row anyway. You try not to think. You fail. You think about the dead men. You try to remember something specific, a joke, a voice, a story they told by the fire, and you can't. Just flashes, a laugh, a scar. One of them had a missing tooth, maybe, or a tattoo. You're not sure anymore. They're already fading. You wonder how long it'll take for you to do the same if it happens to you. If you fall during the next raid, how long until your name slips from memory? How long until someone says take their oar and moves on? Probably minutes, maybe less at some point. Your hands start bleeding again. The blisters opened back up. The salt water stings, but you barely notice. The pain has become background noise, just another part of the sea. You grip the oar tighter and keep going. Behind you, one of the captives shifts. You don't look. You don't want to see their faces. You don't want to know who's watching, who's counting how many raiders made it home, who's wondering which ones won't be there next time. You just row. Someone starts singing. Not a song of victory, not a song of mourning, just a low, tuneless hum that drifts over the oars and settles on your shoulders like another weight. You don't know the words. You don't want to. The boat cacks again. The horizon doesn't change. You keep going. Eventually, the sky begins to darken. Evening, or maybe just more smoke rolling in. It's hard to tell anymore. You've lost track of time, of direction, of how many strokes you've pulled, of how much of yourself you've left behind in that ruined village. The man across from you nods, not to you, just in general, like he's decided to survive today. You nod back. The dead don't row, but you do because someone has to, because the boat has to move, because you're still here. And right now, that's enough. You row and row. You've been doing it so long now that the motion feels detached from you, like your arms belong to someone else, and you're just borrowing them. Your hands are raw. Your fingers stick to the oar when you shift your grip. The blisters have given way to deeper wounds. Not cuts exactly, but soft, worn through patches of skin that don't even sting anymore, just throb. Your back is a knot. Your legs don't bend properly. Your shoulders ache in a dull, permanent way, as if you've been carved into a slightly more the hunched version of yourself. The boat glides across the water with quiet ease, completely unaware of what it's carrying. No one talks. There's nothing to say. You'd think there would be, that someone might break the silence with a joke or a song or a story. Something to puncture the thick, invisible fog hanging over the crew. But nothing comes. The men are slouched and distant, eyes fixed on the horizon or the backs of their own hands. The only sounds are wood creaking, water slapping, and the occasional grunt as someone shifts position and remembers they're still bleeding. There's no debrief, no recap, no what went wrong or what went well, no list of names, no head count, just this silent, grinding exhale of a voyage in reverse. Back the way you came, but somehow much farther. You try not to think. That works for about 20 seconds. Then the images start coming back. The child under the bed, just a glimpse. Small, wide eyes, the curve of a cheek, a hand gripping a carved wooden animal. You don't know what happened after. You don't want to. No, but you remember the way your boots crunched over the floorboards as you left the house. You remember not looking back. Then there was the roof. The way fire moved across it like it had a plan. Like it knew exactly where to go. You remember the heat, the noise, the moment the whole thing collapsed inward with a sigh and someone cheered. You don't remember who. You don't want to. You dig the oar deeper into the water like maybe you can. Row your way from your own head. The sea is flat, glass-like, no wind, no current, just endless grey stretching out in every direction. The kind of stillness that should feel calming but doesn't. It feels like being watched, like the water knows. Where you've been, even the gulls are quiet. You row harder. One of the men throws up over the side. No one reacts. He does it quietly, neatly, then wipes his mouth and goes back to rowing. You think his name is Chimeras or something like that. You've seen him gut a man with a smile. Now he looks like a sack of meat with too many miles on it. Another man has fallen asleep sitting upright. His head bobs with the motion of the boat. You wonder if he's dreaming. You wonder what kind of dreams someone like him has after a raid like that. Then you wonder if he sleeps at all once he's home. Then you wonder, if you will. The captives sit quietly in the center, bound, silent, still. You try not to look at them. They aren't speaking. They aren't crying. They're just there, eyes down, shoulders slumped. One of them, a boy, maybe 12, stares out at the sea like he's trying to memorize it, like he might never see it again. You wonder if he's hoping to drown. You look away. You row. Every stroke feels slower now. Not because you're tired, though you are deeply, but because the adrenaline is gone completely. That buzzing, white-hot numbness that carried you through the fire, through the blood, through the split-second decisions you barely remember making. It's vanished. Now there's just aftermath, an ache, and the occasional flicker of guilt you pretend not to feel. You tell yourself this is normal, that this is the job, that this is what warriors do. But you've never felt less like a warrior than you do right now. Hunched over, drenched in salt and sweat and things that aren't entirely yours. Rowing a boat, full of deadied men and silent strangers across a sea that no longer seems to care who wins. You think about going home, what that will look like. The feast, the fire, the way people will cheer when they see the silver, the cloaks, the captives. Someone will raise a horn and tell a tale, maybe about you. Probably not. You didn't do anything worth singing about. You didn't slay a hero. You didn't torture a temple. You didn't collect trophies. You just didn't die. And now you're rowing home with smoke behind your eyes and bruises under your skin, and the kind of silence inside you that's too deep for words. Someone finally speaks. It's just one word. Thirsty. The man next to you passes a skin. No one says thank you. No one needs to. The water tastes stale, warm, metallic. You sip anyway because you're thirsty too, and because your body, traitorous thing that it is, still wants to keep going. You pass the skin down, you row. The coastline appears as a smudge. Familiar hills, a few trees, the shape of something that used to mean safety. You feel nothing. You thought you'd feel something. Relief, triumph, dread. Instead, there's just emptiness. You dip the oar again. One more stroke and another. The sea carries you closer, but you're not sure if you're returning to anything, or if some part of you is still back there, sitting in the smoke, watching a child hide under a bed. You don't recognize the sound of cheering at first. After the quiet, after the rowing, after the endless salt bleacher silence of the return trip, it startles you. Voices raised, hands clapping, feet stomping, laughter, music, the clang of tankers, and the high shrill yelp of a flute being overplayed. It hits you all at once as the boat scrapes against the rocky shore. You're home, and they're happy to see you. There's a crowd gathered on the beach, not huge, but enthusiastic. Family, friends, the kind of people who stayed behind and now feel invested in your survival because they contributed a shield or a cloak or a single hastily sharpened blade. Children run up and down the shoreline waving and shouting names. Someone throws flowers. They land in a puddle and sink instantly. You step off the boat and nearly collapse. Your legs aren't sure how land works anymore. The ground feels fake, like a poorly made rug over something unstable. A woman hands you a cup of mee. She says something about your bravery. You smile, nod, drink. It tastes like ash and honey. Someone grabs your shoulder and yells, "He's back." You don't know who they're talking to or about. Maybe you, maybe someone behind you, maybe someone who didn't make it. You smile again because that's what you're supposed to do because you're alive and people expect that to come with enthusiasm. You lift the mee like a toast. Everyone cheers. You feel like throwing up. The loot is brought ashore carefully, proudly. With ceremony, sacks of silver, armfuls of cloaks and jewelry, a crucifix, a few heavy chests dragged across the dirt like trophies from a beast that didn't put up enough of a fight. The crowd oohs and ahs. No one mentions where it came from. No one asks about the blood. Your share is handed to you in a small sack. It's lighter than you remember. You open it. The cup is there. The ring, a few coins. Not missing, just smaller now. Less shiny, more ordinary. It looks like a reward. It feels like a confession. There's a feast. Of course there is. A goat is roasted. Bread is broken. Mead flows like a poor decision. Someone tells a story. Not exactly what happened, but a version of it. A more palatable cut. Cleaned up, reshaped. There's mention of heroism, of glory, of clever maneuvers no one remembers doing. They talk about burning the church like it was a strategic triumph. They leave out the part where you hesitated. They say you were brave. You say nothing. You sit at the edge of the firelight, not quite in the celebration, not quite out of it, half shadowed, half present. Someone offers you more food. You shake your head. Your stomach has closed shop. Someone else asks what it was like. You lie. You say, "It was quick. that you did your part, that you're proud. Everyone nods, everyone smiles, everyone wants to believe it. So you let them. Later, you slip away. No one notices. The feast is still going. Someone's singing. Someone else is passed out in the grass. You walk home slowly, quietly down the path you've walked 1,000 times before, feeling like a ghost. With a sack of coins, your house is exactly where you left it. Small thatch, smelling faintly of smoke and old onions. You open the door, step inside, close it behind you, and exhale. The silver goes under your bed, not on a shelf, not in a chest, just under the bed, wrapped in cloth, shoved into the dark. You don't want to look at it anymore. Not because it's cursed, not because you think the gods are watching, but because some part of you already knows this isn't wealth. It's evidence. Every piece of story you don't want to remember, every coin and name you never asked. You wash your hands. The dirt doesn't come off. You sit on the edge of your bed and stare at nothing for a while. Sleep doesn't come easy. The body is exhausted, but your mind keeps replaying the same scenes. The fire, the eyes, the silence, the humming on the boat. You try to replace them with good memories, but there aren't any right now. Just still frames of things you didn't want to do, and things you didn't try hard enough to stop. You lie down, you pull the blanket over you. It feels heavier than usual. In the days that follow, people treat you differently. Not worse, just differently. With difference, with curiosity, with the kind of half-respect usually reserved for people who've survived something no one wants to talk about. You nod a lot. You say you're fine. You walk through the village like someone who belongs here, even though part of you stayed behind in the ruins of a chapel or in a burning field, or under the bed of a house that isn't there anymore. You don't visit the others. You don't want to know if they feel the same. You suspect they do, but that would make it real. Sometimes late at night, you hear someone crying. You're not sure if it's a captive in one of the nearby houses, or someone who came back, or you. You try to sleep. You really do. You lie down. You pull the blanket over your shoulders. You close your eyes. You breathe slow and deep. Like someone told you once that would help, but it doesn't. Because behind your eyelids, the village still burns. The flames don't fade. They flicker and rise, crackling behind your ribs, like they never really went out. You see them moving across rooftops. You hear the war horn again, that low, awful sound that started everything. You smell the smoke, and underneath it all, you hear the screaming. Not loud, not dramatic, just constant, familiar, carried on the back of every silence. You sit up, gasping like you've run a mile. There's no fire, just your house, just your bed, just the night. But the screams came with you. You start sleeping less, not on purpose, not some noble act of defiance. Your body just refuses. You lie in bed until the sky starts to lighten, until the birds begin to stir, until the cold sets into your joints. And then you rise. Not rested, not renewed, just vertical. You walk the perimeter of the village in the early hours as if that might settle something. You check the boats. You sit by the water. You stare into the trees like you're expecting someone to walk out and demand an explanation. No one ever does. People talk about spring. It comes up more and more as the days pass. Next spring, next raid. Bigger spoils, easier targets. They say it like a promise, like a celebration, like it's something to look forward to. You hear plans being made, names being offered, weapons being sharpened again. Even though winter hasn't even arrived yet, you fake a smile. You nod when people say things like, "We'll need you again." You raise your cup when someone toasts to next time. You wonder if it would be easier to leave. Just walk into the woods. One day and keep walking. You don't, because you don't know where else to go. You catch yourself staring at the silver. You didn't mean to. You were just reaching for something under the bed. An old cloak maybe, or a pair of boots. And your hand brushed the cloth-wrapped bundle. For a moment, you thought about leaving it there, but then you pulled it out, unwrapped it. The cup, the ring, the necklace, the coins. You lay them out on the floor like you're hoping they'll say something new this time. They don't. They just sit there heavy and quiet, catching the light in a way that makes them look sharper than before. They don't look like victory. They look like weight. You wonder if the others feel it too. The heaviness, the silence, the part of you that stayed behind. You don't ask because there's a rule, not written, not spoken, but enforced all the same. You do not talk about how it felt. You talk about what you brought back, what you broke, how fast you were, how hard you hit. You do not talk about the crying, or the fire, or the way your hands shook afterward. That's the line. You stay behind it. So does everyone else. But sometimes you catch it in a glance, in a twitch, in the way someone flinches when a door slams, in the way a laugh dies too quickly, or a story changes halfway through, or someone excuses themselves from the feast early and doesn't come back. You know the look now, the one you see in the reflective surface of a bowl or in the still water. Before dawn, the one that says, "I'm still there in that village. In that moment, in that part of myself I don't want to know." You see it everywhere, especially in the mirror. Some nights you dream of before, not before the raid, before the idea of raids. Back when danger was wolves in the woods, or storms, or your neighbor getting too drunk and challenging you to a wrestling match. Back when your biggest concern was whether your roof would hold through the winter, or if your goat was pregnant again. In those dreams, things are simple. The food is warm, the days are long, your hands are clean. Then you wake up and the smoke is still in your hair. You wonder what the villagers dreamed of the night before you arrived. You wonder what they prayed for, what they thought the next day would hold, whether they made plans, whether they told stories around the fire, whether someone kissed someone else goodnight. You wonder how long they screamed. You wonder why some of them didn't. You wonder why you remember the quiet more than the noise. You used to believe in glory, in the idea that strength made you important, that courage was a weapon, that men could carve their names into the world with nothing but steel and will. You're not sure what you believe in now. You believe in rowing, in weight, in blood that takes too long to wash off, in silver that stares back at you like it knows what you did, to earn it. You believe in not talking about it, because that's what warriors do. You don't know what will happen in the spring. Maybe you'll go again. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll find a reason to stay behind. A twisted ankle, a sick relative, a lie that sounds enough like truth to stick. Or maybe you'll be back in the boat with your oar, with your torch, with your silence. So that was your first raid. You didn't die, you didn't drown, you didn't scream. At least not where anyone could hear you. You held the axe. You rowed the boat. You watched the sky turn orange, then grey, then empty. You came back with silver stories and something inside you that doesn't quite fit anymore. People call you a warrior now. You let them because it's easier than explaining that mostly you are tired. Cold, hungry, confused, that the glory everyone talks about felt more like smoke in your lungs and silence in your bones. but you're home. You've survived the sea, the fire, and the part of yourself that wanted to lie down and never get up again. The hardest part isn't what happened back there. It's carrying it forward. So now you rest. Let the war horn fade. Let the smoke drift off. Let the silver stay hidden where it can't see you. You've done enough for one life or two. Sink into the quiet. Let your body soften. Let your grip loosen. You don't need to hold anything now. Not a blade, not a burden, not a memory. Just breathe. You're not in the boat anymore. You're just drifting. And maybe for once, that's enough.